They've spent centuries hiding the one part of your body that could set you free. Not your heart, not your brain, but the pineal gland, the tiny, light-sensitive organ buried deep in your mind that ancient civilizations revered as the seat of the soul. Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom and sacred science, didn't just speak about enlightenment, he mapped it. And what he left behind wasn't mysticism, it was method. A step-by-step technique encoded in symbols, rituals, and the body itself. But somewhere along the way, the world forgot. Or more accurately, it was made to forget. You were never supposed to open this eye, because once you do, everything changes. You don't see the world differently, you see beyond it. And that's where their control ends. This isn't fantasy. This is physiology, consciousness, and cosmic law. You're not here to be entertained. You're here to remember. So let's begin. For most people, the pineal gland is just a curious term they might have come across in a biology textbook, glossed over and dismissed. A tiny, cone-shaped structure at the center of the brain, no bigger than a grain of rice. But for the ancients, it wasn't small, it was everything. It was the gateway between the physical and the divine, the organ that allowed mortals to commune with the infinite. The Egyptians carved it into stone, the Hindus called it the third eye, and the Greeks revered it as the seat of the soul. And yet today, it's ignored, ridiculed, or worse, systematically suppressed. Think about that. Why would modern systems so carefully obscure something that every ancient tradition saw as sacred? Because this gland, this so-called vestigial structure, is not just another part of your anatomy. It is your antenna, your internal compass to higher truth. It receives light, not just physical light, but spiritual light, metaphysical insight, and frequencies that bypass the five senses. And what happens when you begin to activate it? You stop believing what you're told and start remembering what you've always known. You stop reacting and start seeing, not with your eyes, but with the eye, the one they tried to blind. But they didn't just ignore the pineal gland, they went after it. With fluoride, with blue light, with programming that teaches you it's all nonsense. You think that's an accident? That your drinking water just happened to include a chemical that calcifies this gland and renders it sluggish and dormant? That your lifestyle just conveniently overexposes you to light frequencies that distort your circadian rhythm and disrupt melatonin production, one of the pineal's key secretions? You weren't just taught to ignore your inner eye, you were trained to forget it even exists. And as it dulled, so did your vision. You began to see the world only in surfaces, in schedules, in screens. You began to think that logic was truth and that anything invisible must be imaginary. But Thoth never spoke in logic. He spoke in symbols. He spoke in metaphors not because he was vague, but because what he was pointing to couldn't be reduced into words. The pineal gland doesn't respond to argument. It responds to vibration, to resonance, to intention. And when you begin to tune back into those frequencies, you remember that you are not this name, this job, this role you've been performing. You are awareness itself, streaming through form, reaching upward, inward, beyond. Some of what Thoth taught about this process is too detailed to fully explore here, especially in a place like YouTube. That's why we created the free Insights Academy newsletter, where we share what can't be said in public. And for a limited time, you'll receive a free copy of the Kybalion when you sign up. Just hit the link in the description. The reason this gland is so feared by those who seek control is because it connects you to something no system can govern: direct experience of the infinite. The pineal doesn't require dogma. It doesn't need permission. And that's why institutions, from religion to science to media, have spent lifetimes discrediting it. Because when you open it, you stop needing them. You no longer need a middleman between you and divinity. You become the living temple, the initiate, the priest, and the altar. Thoth didn't ask for blind belief. He never said, "Worship me." He said, "Know thyself." And the pineal gland is the door through which that knowing begins. But this isn't just philosophy. It's an anatomical process, an internal technology. The ancients weren't guessing. They knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't build pyramids for burial. They built them as initiatory chambers, acoustic resonators, tuned to awaken something deep within. And that something begins in the center of the brain, in the pineal, where light is born not from the sun, but from spirit. The reason you feel like something has always been missing is because it has. Not outside of you, but inside. And what you've been missing isn't a belief. It's a connection, a direct, living, luminous connection to the source of your being. That connection has a physical location, and it's waiting for you to remember. You've been told the divine is out there, somewhere above the clouds, beyond the stars, in a realm too distant to touch. But Thoth never taught that. What he passed down wasn't a religion of worship, but a science of embodiment. The body, in his teachings, was not a prison. It was a portal, a living temple, encoded with sacred geometry, alchemical currents, and hidden passageways. And at the center of that temple stands a pillar. In ancient Egypt, they called it the jade. Modern anatomy calls it the spine. But Thoth knew it as something far more. It was the axis between the worlds, the highway on which spirit ascends and descends. The jade was never just a symbol of stability. It represented the awakened human, a being who had raised the energy of the base to the crown, igniting the inner sun. Every vertebra, every nerve channel, every breath you take is part of this system. The spine is not just a support structure, it's a conductor. And once you begin to understand that, you realize that enlightenment isn't something that happens by accident. It's engineered, step by step, breath by breath. Thoth's technique wasn't about escaping the body to reach higher realms. It was about descending fully into it, mastering it, aligning it. Because until you activate the body's internal network, the higher frequencies can't anchor. You don't plug into the infinite by bypassing the body. You plug into it by tuning the body like an instrument. And the pineal gland is the crown of that instrument, the final resonance point. The process starts in the lower centers, the root, the sacrum. These are not just chakras from New Age theory. These are physiological locations with energetic consequences. They govern your instincts, your survival, your sexual energy. And that energy isn't meant to be suppressed. It's meant to be refined, raised. When properly understood, it becomes the fuel for spiritual ignition. But most people never raise it. They're taught to either indulge it endlessly or deny it completely. Both are traps. Thoth taught a third path, transmutation. When the breath is stilled and intention is clear, this energy begins to rise. It doesn't shoot upward in one explosive moment. It spirals, winds, climbs. Like the serpents on the staff of Hermes, like the strands of DNA. This is not a metaphor. It's a blueprint. The jade is real. And as the energy travels up its shaft, it activates gland after gland until it reaches the pineal. You were never meant to rely on external authority to find the divine. You were designed to experience it directly through your own system. And the beauty of this design is staggering. The spine, the brain, the nervous system, none of it is random. It's sacred architecture. The very shape of the spine mimics the staff of power, the wand of the magician, the caduceus of Hermes, the central pillar in the temple, all of it encoded, all of it waiting for you to remember how to use it. But to do that, you must first shed the belief that your body is ordinary. It's not. It's the most advanced vehicle in existence. And Thoth left the instructions. They're just not written in plain English. They're written in symbols, geometry, and vibration. The Ankh wasn't a decoration. It was a cipher. The Eye of Horus wasn't a myth. It was a map of your brain. And the Jed wasn't a religious totem. It was the secret spine of the soul. You walk around every day with a temple more powerful than any structure built on earth. And at the top of that temple is the pineal gland, the lamp in the tower. But until you activate the current within, the lamp stays dark. That's the difference between belief and experience. You can study all the ancient texts in the world, but until you engage your body as the tool it was designed to be, the mysteries remain hidden. And what Thoth taught was never theory, it was practice. Direct, living, embodied gnosis. So when they tell you to leave the body to find God, remember Thoth's wisdom. Descend into your temple, because only then can you rise. There is a substance within you more precious than gold. The ancients knew it. Thoth spoke of it without naming it directly, because what is sacred is never handed over cheaply. They called it the oil of light, the sacred secretion, the Christos, and every human being produces it, yet almost no one knows what it is or what it's for. This secretion is born in the claustrum, a small region in the brain, and descends through the spinal cord in perfect rhythm with the lunar cycle. It is not metaphorical, it is biochemical, physical, real. But like all great truths, it has been hidden in allegory, mistranslated through religions, and mocked by modern science. Because if you knew what this oil could do, you'd stop chasing external salvation and start protecting your own sacred inner flow. The ancient Egyptians understood that the brain was not just a processor of thought, but the throne of God in the body. They knew of a fluid that, when preserved and elevated, would return to its source and illuminate the mind with divine light. That fluid still exists within you. But here's the truth they'll never teach you. Every month, if your body is aligned, a seed is formed in your solar plexus, a tiny spark of creative potential. And this seed requires the sacred oil to ascend. If it rises undisturbed, passing through the spinal column, activating glands along the way, it arrives at the pineal gland where it undergoes transmutation. The oil becomes light, the body becomes temple, the initiate becomes awakened. This is why ancient traditions place such value on self-discipline, not because pleasure is wrong, but because energy is sacred. Ejaculation, overindulgence, stress, anger, and negative emotion drain the body of its vital fluid, and without the oil, the seed cannot rise. Without the seed, the light cannot awaken. You begin to see how the modern world is perfectly designed to interrupt this process. Through overstimulation, addiction, poor nutrition, toxic media, and perpetual distraction. Because a body that leaks this oil never has enough light to awaken, and a population that never awakens is easy to manage, easy to sell to, easy to control. Thoth wasn't interested in controlling anyone. His teachings were for initiates, those willing to walk the narrow path, those who understood that alchemy isn't just about metals, but about the refinement of the self. The sacred secretion is your inner gold. It's the liquid fire that, when treated with reverence, becomes the spark that lights the pineal. You don't need to believe this to be true. You just need to try living in a way that preserves your inner energy and see what happens. Once the oil begins to rise, it changes everything. Your thoughts become sharper. Your dreams become more vivid. Your instincts grow stronger. The veil begins to thin. This is why the ancients linked the process to resurrection, to the phoenix, to the rebirth of Christ. It wasn't about literal death. It was about the death of ignorance. The moment when light returns to the throne and the eye opens from within. They encoded this in every major text and symbol. The land flowing with milk and honey. That's your brain, your pituitary and pineal, secreting sacred substances when aligned. The story of the prodigal son. That's the seed returning home after being lost in the lower centers. Bethlehem, the house of bread, is your solar plexus, the birthplace of the seed. 3 days in the tomb. That's how long the oil rests in the brain before it transforms. It was never about history, it was always about you. You've been taught to look outward for signs and miracles, but the real miracle is inside your own anatomy. A biological process so sophisticated, so divine, it turns matter into spirit. This is not religion. This is sacred science. And it begins when you stop wasting your power and start walking the path of preservation, because the oil of light is not unlimited. It is precious. And once you begin to preserve it, once you honor it, you'll understand why the world never wanted you to know it was there in the first place. Most people look at ancient symbols and see art, myth, or decoration. They see the ankh and call it a cross. They see the Eye of Horus and think of superstition. They see the jade pillar and think it's just another old carving in stone. But Thoth never wasted symbols. He encoded knowledge within them, functional, applicable, physiological knowledge. Not abstract ideas, but maps, tools, keys. Because once you understand how to read these glyphs, they stop being dead images. They become living instructions. You realize these symbols weren't for worship. They were for activation. Take the Eye of Horus. Broken into 6 segments, each piece corresponds to a human sense: sight, sound, taste, touch, thought, and intuition. But what most people miss is this. When you overlay the Eye of Horus on a cross-section of the human brain, it matches the structure exactly. The thalamus, the corpus callosum, the pineal, and pituitary, all present in the image. This isn't a coincidence. This is anatomical precision, a hidden code preserved in plain sight for thousands of years. Then there's the ankh, often mistaken for a religious icon or symbol of life. But it's more than that. The top circle represents the pineal gland, the 0 point, the sun, the receiver. The vertical line is the spine, the jade pillar, the horizontal bar, the arms of the cross, the balance between the physical and energetic body. It's a symbol, yes, but it's also a diagram, one that describes the same process every mystic, initiate, and yogi has attempted to embody: the raising of inner energy, the awakening of the eye, the birth of spiritual light inside the skull. Symbols speak a language the subconscious understands. Unlike modern language, they don't rely on logic. They bypass the mind and embed directly into the energetic field. That's why the ancients used them everywhere, on temple walls, jewelry, manuscripts, and even their daily tools. Because when you are surrounded by symbols of alignment, the body remembers. It responds. The dormant systems begin to wake up. Thoth didn't just teach with words. He taught with architecture, with geometry, with sound and rhythm. He encoded frequency into stone. The pyramids weren't built to impress the gods. They were built to resonate with the Earth's natural harmonics, creating a vibrational environment that amplified inner stillness. Initiates would lie in the chambers and listen, not with their ears, but with their bones, their cells, their consciousness. Every angle, every proportion, every chamber was designed to mirror the structure of the human body and to stimulate its hidden capacities. What we've forgotten is that symbolism is science, not the kind of science you learn in a lab, but the sacred science of how consciousness operates through matter. Geometry isn't just math, it's the fingerprint of creation. The spiral, the circle, the triangle, all universal expressions of the energetic patterns within you. When you meditate inside certain shapes, your energy field changes. When you chant specific sounds, your brain shifts frequencies. When you breathe in rhythm with sacred proportion, your nervous system realigns. This is why Thoth's teachings survive, not because people preserved the doctrine, but because they preserved the shapes, the forms, the codes. And even when the texts were burned and the languages lost, the symbols remained, carved into rock, etched into consciousness, waiting for someone like you to stop seeing them as art and start using them as instruction. You don't need to understand every detail right now. You just need to know this: the same geometry that exists in the pyramids, the temples, and the ancient scrolls exists inside your body. Your bones, your organs, your breath patterns, they all follow the same ratios. You are not a random accident. You are architecture. And your awakening doesn't come from adopting new beliefs. It comes from activating ancient memory, and symbols are the doorway. So the next time you see the eye, the ankh, or the jade, don't just look at it, feel it. It's not asking to be decoded, it's asking to be remembered. Because inside you, there's a part that already knows what it means. Buried beneath sand and time, cloaked in metaphor and mystery, the emerald tablets of Thoth aren't just relics of a lost civilization. They are transmissions, encoded instructions for those with eyes to see and minds willing to remember. These are not the words of a man trying to be followed. These are the words of a being who transcended form, leaving behind a breadcrumb trail for those ready to rise from the sleep of the physical world. and central to those teachings is the path to awakening the inner sun. Thoth speaks of rising from the darkness into the light, of lying dormant in the halls of Amenti, awaiting the call of consciousness. Many read that and imagine a mythological underworld, a fantasy realm. But the truth is more grounded and far more powerful. The halls of Amenti are not a place beneath your feet. They are the deeper chambers of your own mind, dormant neural pathways, latent circuits in your body's energy system that lie unused, gathering dust in the forgotten corners of consciousness. And when the call comes, when you begin to remember, these halls light up. Not metaphorically, literally. The inner sun is not a poetic phrase. It's the pineal gland at full activation, a bioelectrical center that, when awakened, glows with its own subtle light. It produces DMT, a molecule that scientists still can't fully explain. It receives and radiates frequencies beyond the physical spectrum. It bridges dimensions. And when it's activated, the veil lifts. You stop seeing the world as a series of objects. You begin to see patterns, energy, truth. You recognize illusion for what it is, and you stop being controlled by what you've been taught to call reality. Thoth never told us to escape the body. He taught that transcendence comes through embodiment, through stillness, through intention, and through purification. His tablets speak of mastering the self before commanding the elements, of aligning with cosmic law before seeking power. The path was never about domination. It was about resonance. To awaken the pineal, you must resonate with the truth of who you are, not the story you were given, not the role you perform, but the pure awareness behind it all. The inner sun doesn't rise when you're distracted, overfed, overstimulated, and disconnected from your breath. It rises when you return to stillness, when you honor your own cycles, your own rhythms, when you quiet the noise and feel the frequency behind the silence. This is not a passive experience. It's an energetic ignition. Your spine becomes the altar, your breath becomes the prayer, and your pineal becomes the flame. The tablets describe the transformation of man into light, not in theory, in essence. When the oil has risen, when the energies align, when the circuits are clear, the light that dwells within begins to move. It ascends the spine, it touches the brain, it opens the eye. And the initiate becomes something new, not more, not better, but more real, more whole. No longer fragmented by belief, trauma, and programming, but reintegrated into the source from which all things came. This is why Thoth wrote in code. Because this truth cannot be understood by the mind alone. It must be felt, lived, experienced. You cannot read your way to awakening. You must do the work. Preserve your energy. Raise the current. Activate the lamp. The emerald tablets weren't meant to be worshipped. They were meant to be applied. The language may be dense, the symbols obscure, but the message is clear. You are not a passive being. You are a cosmic instrument, built to channel light through form. And when that inner sun rises, you don't need external validation. You don't need systems to tell you who you are. You become your own source of knowing, your own guide. That's what Thoth was trying to pass on. Not a doctrine, not a religion, but the memory of your own light. Because once you remember it, nothing can control you again. There's a reason you've never been taught any of this. Not in school, not in church, not in the so-called science that prides itself on objectivity. There's a reason the pineal gland is dismissed as a vestigial relic. Why ancient teachings are laughed off as mythology. Why symbols like the Eye of Horus have been reduced to fashion accessories. It's not because the knowledge was wrong, it's because it was too powerful. And power, when placed in the hands of the individual, threatens every system built on control. Thoth's wisdom wasn't banned because it was dangerous. It was hidden because it was liberating. It made you sovereign, self-aware, impossible to manipulate. And the world that grew in the absence of that wisdom is one that feeds off obedience, not awakening. From the moment you're born, you're conditioned to externalize truth, to look for answers in institutions, in experts, in doctrines. But none of those paths lead inward. None of them lead home. They replace temples with churches, and the geometry of sacred space with walls of fear and guilt. They replaced breathwork with confession, energy preservation with shame, inner knowledge with blind belief. They turned alchemical transformation into sin, and sacred symbols into warning signs. Anything that directed you inward was painted as dangerous. Anything that made you question authority was called rebellion. And anyone who claimed to hold light within them was crucified, silenced, or turned into a symbol of passive suffering. The war on the pineal gland is real, not just in metaphor, but in method. Fluoride in the water, processed foods that numb the nervous system, a society that glorifies overstimulation and ridicules stillness. It's all part of a matrix, designed to keep you from ever lighting that lamp within. Because when the pineal awakens, the illusion dissolves. The veil lifts. You stop needing permission to exist. You stop chasing validation. You begin to see through the systems designed to keep you in a loop of working, consuming, fearing, doubting, repeating. Why do you think ancient knowledge was pushed underground? Why do you think the Hermetic teachings were driven into secrecy? The emerald tablets encoded in layers of metaphor, the sacred texts of the East turned into exotic curiosities rather than serious tools for transformation. Because real awakening doesn't need a middleman. It doesn't make profit. It doesn't need hierarchy. It doesn't serve the state, or the corporation, or the organized religious structure. It serves you. And that kind of independence is a threat. They want you docile, not dangerous, distracted, not disciplined, addicted, not aligned. Because a person who preserves their sacred energy and turns their attention inward becomes something rare, unshakable. And unshakable people don't fall for false narratives. They don't buy their worth. They don't wait for permission to live. They remember who they are. This is why you've been taught to dismiss ancient symbols as fantasy. Why you've been conditioned to equate mysticism with madness. Why science won't touch the pineal gland beyond its function as a regulator of melatonin. Because the moment it acknowledges that this gland might do more than manage sleep, the entire worldview it's built on begins to crack. And when it cracks, the light gets in. The same light Thoth spoke of. The same light you carry inside you. You don't have to reject the world to see through it. You just have to stop letting it define your limits. Because there is no law of nature that demands your conformity. There is no divine mandate that says you must forget your origin. What's unnatural is the way you've been trained to ignore your own intelligence, your own power, your own connection to something higher. And the most tragic part, you didn't even realize it was happening. That's how deep the programming runs. But it's not irreversible. Awakening doesn't come from anger. It comes from clarity. From the choice to stop leaking your energy into systems that feed off your fear and instead begin directing that energy back inward. That's when the war ends. Not because the system surrenders, but because you stop fighting it on its terms. You stop feeding it with your attention. And that's what they fear the most. Not violent revolution, but quiet remembrance. Because one awakened being can't be controlled. And many, they start to build a world the system can't survive in. This path isn't built on belief, it's built on practice. Thoth didn't leave us temples so we could worship stones. He left us blueprints, coded into rituals, symbols, geometry, for how to activate something within. The technique he taught wasn't meant to be mystical, it was mechanical, a physiological and energetic process so refined it could awaken what lies dormant in every human being. But modern minds want shortcuts, quick fixes, instant enlightenment. That's not how this works. There's no pill, no app, no hack. Only you, your breath, your body, and your attention. The technique begins with the foundation, the breath. Not the shallow, unconscious breath most people take, but conscious, rhythmic, refined breathing. Breath is the carrier of life force, what the ancients called prana, chi, or sekhem. Thoth taught that to raise the energy up the jed, the spine, you must first master the breath. It becomes the pump, the activator. Each inhale draws in potential. Each exhale purifies stagnation. But it's not just about oxygen. It's about awareness. Breath draws your attention inward, aligning body and mind, preparing the temple for something sacred. Stillness follows. In a world addicted to movement, stillness is power. It's in stillness that the cerebrospinal fluid, the sacred secretion we spoke of, can rise. As the breath slows, the spine elongates, and the nervous system relaxes, this fluid begins to flow upward. It's not magic, it's physics. The more you preserve your inner energy, through retention, fasting, discipline, the more charge you build in the lower centers. That charge doesn't stay there. It seeks to rise, to spiral, to climb, and the spine is its staircase. But this isn't just biological, it's electrical. Your spine is filled with nerves, with channels of communication. When the breath is aligned with intention, and the energy is retained rather than dispersed, it creates an electromagnetic field within the body. This field is measurable. It changes your brainwaves, your heart coherence, your hormonal balance. And as this field strengthens, the pineal gland, buried deep in the center of the brain, begins to stir. The pineal is covered in tiny crystals. Yes, physically, these piezoelectric crystals respond to pressure, to vibration. When cerebrospinal fluid rises and bathes the pineal, and when breath and stillness align, it creates a charge. That charge activates the crystals. They begin to vibrate. And in that vibration, a signal is sent, not just through your nervous system, but beyond it, outward, inward, through dimensions most have forgotten how to sense. This is the moment ancient traditions called the awakening of the inner sun. Not just a flash of insight, but a deep illumination. The gland glows, secreting its sacred chemistry. You feel it as pressure in the head, as a subtle light behind closed eyes, as knowing that doesn't come from the mind. This is when time begins to dissolve. You are no longer in the room. You are in all rooms. You are not in your name. You are in your essence. Thoth described this experience as rising above the flesh, as traveling through the gates of space, as becoming one with the all. But again, he wasn't being poetic. He was describing what happens when you activate the full capacity of the human system. You begin to experience multidimensionality. Time is no longer linear. Space is no longer fixed. You see through illusion because the eye within you has opened. But this technique is not a one-time event. It is a discipline, a rhythm, a way of living. You align your actions to support the rise of energy. You eat not to feed craving, but to nourish light. You breathe not to survive, but to awaken. You meditate not to escape the world, but to engage it more deeply, from a place of clarity, of vision. This is what it means to walk the path of the initiate, to take responsibility for your inner fire and guide it, step by step, toward illumination. And when this practice becomes your way of life, the world around you begins to shift, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You are no longer seeing with eyes of flesh alone. You are seeing with the eye of light. And what once felt impossible begins to unfold before you, not as a miracle, but as the natural consequence of remembering who you truly are. There's a quiet moment after awakening, when everything feels both familiar and new. You walk the same streets, see the same faces, hear the same news, but something has shifted. The veil is thinner. You start to notice the patterns, the way fear is marketed, the way division is manufactured, the way people are kept busy just enough to never question where their energy is really going. And it hits you not just how much you were asleep, but how many still are. That's when the real work begins. Because this path was never meant to end with you. Awakening is not the destination. It's the beginning of a return. When the inner eye opens, your vision expands beyond personal goals or spiritual highs. You start to see the architecture of the collective dream and how desperately it needs lucid dreamers. You stop asking, how can I escape the system? And start asking, how can I transform it? Thoth never taught isolation. His wisdom was built for transmission. Once you become a bearer of light, your presence becomes a message. You don't preach, you embody, and people feel it. They may not understand what's changed in you, but something stirs. A curiosity, a resonance, the same one that once woke you. This is where personal awakening meets collective evolution. The moment your inner alignment starts to ripple outward, Because every time someone sees through the illusion, it weakens. Not with violence, not with outrage, but with clarity, with stillness, with the kind of truth that doesn't need to shout. This is why systems of control fear awakened individuals, not because they are loud, but because they are uncontrollable. And enough of them gathered, that becomes a tipping point, a moment when the old structures begin to crumble, not because we destroyed them, but because we no longer believe in them. And yet, this path isn't easy. Awakening strips away your illusions, your comforts, your escape routes. It demands honesty. It calls for courage. Not the kind celebrated in stories, but the kind that rises quietly when you choose to see things as they are, and still move forward with an open heart. And in that courage, something powerful emerges: compassion. You begin to understand that those still asleep aren't your enemies. They're you, before the spark. They are not weak. They are waiting. And your presence, your light, your willingness to live truthfully, that's what makes you the guide, not your words. Here's the truth. The system isn't just falling apart. It's being outgrown. And those who carry light are the architects of what comes next. But we must build differently, not from ego or ideology, but from coherence, from resonance, from the shared knowing that we are not separate, that the light I activate in myself touches the light in you, and together we amplify. The world doesn't change when everyone wakes up at once. It changes when a few remember deeply and live it consistently. That's the return Thoth spoke of, not to a land, not to a temple, but to a state of being, a return to source, to truth, to the divine spark, carried in every heart. And when that spark catches fire, it lights the way for others. You don't need to push anyone. Just live it. Let your life be the evidence. Let your energy be the transmission. Let your presence be the reminder. Because you are not just remembering for yourself, you're remembering for all of us. It was never lost. Not really. The light, the knowing, the connection, they've been there from the beginning. Buried, yes, covered in layers of conditioning, fear, noise, and forgetfulness, but not gone. Your pineal gland, your inner eye, your direct access to the infinite has always been quietly pulsing, waiting, not for the right belief, not for a sign from the sky, but for you to remember, to choose, to turn inward and light the lamp with your own breath, your own intention, your own will. Because what Thoth taught is not fantasy. It's physics. It's the sacred law that governs the inner and the outer, the above and the below. And once you walk the path, once you practice the discipline, once you preserve what is sacred in you, you realize something profound. Awakening was never something you had to reach for. It was what you were all along. This is why so many fear the path. Not because it's difficult, though it will challenge everything you thought you knew, but because it makes you responsible, not to the system, not to someone else's rules, but to your own light, to your own truth. And when you see it, when you feel the energy rise, when the gland opens and the light moves through your body, you can't pretend anymore. You can't go back to numbness, to distraction, to pretending this world is all there is, because you've seen beyond the veil. And what you've seen wasn't new. It was ancient, and it was yours. That's the great irony. Everything you were told to chase, peace, meaning, truth, purpose, was inside you all along. The temples were built in your image. The symbols were carved to mirror your anatomy. The texts were written to remind you of what your cells already know. You were never meant to worship Thoth, or the pyramids, or the gods. You were meant to embody them, to live what they represented, to take the keys left in stone and scripture, and use them to unlock your own consciousness. Because that is the real initiation. Not rituals, not robes, not titles, but remembrance, embodiment, living light in human form. And now that you've heard this, now that you've felt something stir inside you, the question is simple. What will you do with it? Will you let it fade back into concept? Or will you breathe into it, practice it, walk it, and allow it to become real? This path doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. It asks only that you honor what is rising in you now. Because every moment you choose inner alignment over outer distraction, you stoke the fire. Every breath taken in stillness is a step closer to ignition. And every time you remember that your body is a temple and your mind a gateway, you dismantle a piece of the illusion. This isn't about being better than anyone. It's about being fully yourself. Not the version shaped by fear or expectation, but the version that remembers its origin in the all. The version that carries wisdom in its bones and light in its blood. The version that doesn't just talk about awakening, but lives it, quietly and powerfully, from the inside out. You've made it this far for a reason. Something in you already knew. So don't stop here. Don't let this become another forgotten insight. Go deeper. Preserve your energy. Raise the current. Breathe with intention. Live with reverence. And above all, protect your light. Because it's not just yours. It's the thread that connects us all. And the more of us who remember, the faster this old world gives way to the new. If you haven't joined the Insights Academy newsletter yet, now is your chance. What we've shared here is only the surface. There is more, much more, that we cannot say publicly. And for now, you'll still receive the Kybalion ebook for free when you sign up. The link's in the description. Don't miss what comes next. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting. I understood it.